This is a video demonstrating how to join two pieces of knitted fabric, joining row to row across the fabric. This is also called mattress stitch, or a type of seaming. There's lots of types of seaming and joining, and I'm just showing the one in this video where we're going to join rows to rows. I have other videos on joining stitches to stitches and rows to stitches and picking up stitches. So we're going to start out with preparing the fabric and getting ready to seam. It is easiest to make a nice seam when you can see all of the stitches and the fabric is laid out flat. So these have been blocked. And when I block them, what I do is the piece will be wet and I make sure that these edges are pushed all the way out and not curling under, and then I pin them like this to stay in that position until they are dry. I don't put the pins through the yarn, I put it between the stitches, but I put it just like this all around the fabric and let it lay there until it's dry. This makes it much easier to see the areas where you're going to be seaming and make a nice seam. This is what a similar swatch looks like before it was blocked. This one's just been knit, and you can see how the edges completely curl under the underside. So when you're trying to seam this and you lay it out flat, it's really kind of hard to see where you're going to be seaming along this edge because all that fabric is curled under. So you can see the difference between these two pieces. This one's been blocked so that the stitches lay out flat. The edge stitches are all facing the right side of the fabric. Here, unblocked, and the edge stitches are actually facing the wrong side of the fabric. So this is harder to seam. I always block my pieces before I seam them. And then I steam block the seams when they're done to make them look perfect. So we're going to take these two pieces here and we're going to seam them. I use a tapestry needle. And for this project, I'm actually going to use a contrasting yarn so that you can see it. Here's 3 different sizes of tapestry needles. This is a size 18. This is my preferred size. It's got a nice big eye. This is 2 inches long, size 18, nice big eye so you can get the yarn through it, but it's not a humongous needle. This is what most people get in a knitting kit, and it's just so darn big that on just worsted weight fabric like this or smaller fabric, this actually distorts the fabric. It's too big. This one's a good size. It's kind of in between these two, but this is still my preferred. So this is what I'm going to use. And I'm going to cut myself a piece of contrasting yarn here. Now, of course, when you're seaming your project, you don't want to use a contrasting color. I'm just doing that for demonstration purposes. And if you're thinking ahead, when you're starting your project, you could actually leave a tail long enough here to seam up the side, and then you'll have one less end to weave in. So we're going to start. I'm going to magnify this a little bit so we can see it better. We're going to start down here at the bottom. This is the cast on edge of each piece. So we want to make sure we've got the cast on edges down here. We have the right side facing up, the bind off edges up here, and we can tell we have the same number of rows, or at least an even number of rows, because the bind off is going this way on both pieces. If your bind off's going this way on one and this way on the other, then you know they don't have the same number of rows. And usually I like to have the same number of rows. I'll even count my rows as I'm working on something that I'm going to be seaming. Okay, so we're going to start. Enough chit chat. We're going to seam between the very edge stitch, which is the selvage, right here, and this first column of V's. You can see the stitches. See the V's? There's a V. There's a V. So these are the stitches. This is a column of stitches. This is a column of stitches. We're going to use the space between those columns to seam. Between each stitch, the very edge stitch, the selvage stitch, and the next stitch in, there's this little bar. That's the connecting yarn between the two stitches. We're going to use those bars. Over here on this side, this is the selvage edge, and here's the first column in. We're going to seam right in here, in between those two columns. But first we're going to start by making sure that our cast on edge is smooth across. So we're going to, with the tapestry needle and our yarn, we're going to bring it up under the very first thread on the cast on between those two columns of stitches. Can you see that? So here's the selvage, here's the first column in, and I'm just going over one thread of the cast on. I'm going to do the same thing on this side, this very first thread of the cast on. I'm going from back to front. This was back to front, back to front. So now it goes across like this. Then I'm going to go back to front in the exact same place where I made the first one, being careful to not split my seaming thread. So now what I have made is a figure eight. Can you see the figure eight? And when we tighten that, if you put your finger here and hold the tail and tighten this, it'll pull this over so that your cast on edge is smooth all the way across. There's no little stair step there. So now we're going to actually start the seaming. We're going to go back to the second side, and we're going to go between the first row and the second row, or actually the cast on and the first row, and pick up that bar. We're going to go under the bar, and we're not going to pull it tight. And we're going to go over here, same thing. We're going to go between the cast on and the first bar up, go under that bar. When I first heard the term bar in seaming, I had no idea what they were talking about. I thought, what is a bar? I've never heard that in knitting. But it's the strand of yarn that goes between the stitches. Here's a bar right here. Can you see it? Right here. It's between the stitches. Those are the bars. See them? We're going to go under this one. That's the next one up. So we're basically going down in the same hole where we came up the last time, under one bar, and come back up. And we're going to do that on this side. So we're going down in this hole where we came up and under the very next bar. We're not pulling it tight. We're going to go down in the same hole where we came up last time, under one bar, and come up. Being careful to never split your seaming thread. Going down in the same hole, under one bar. Now some people will teach you to go under two bars at a time. That's personal preference. You can do that if you want. I think it looks a lot nicer when you just go under one bar. And once you get this little method down, it goes really quickly and smoothly, and you're going to be amazed at how lovely this looks. Now every time you've gone about an inch or so in doing this, then you can tighten it up. You don't want to tighten it up after every maneuver, because you'll see what happens in a second. When it's tight, it's hard to see where to start the next stitch. So when you tighten it up, what you're going to do is hold the tail. I just put my finger on it right here. I'm holding it. And just pull on this. It's like a zipper. If you have not stitched through your seaming thread, if you accidentally catch it, it will not zip up like this. Do you see how that looks? You can't see the green yarn. The bottom lines up perfectly across the edge. And these two columns of stitches lay exactly next to each other. And you continue doing that. I'm going to turn the movie off and continue seaming up the top till I get up here, and I'll show you what to do at the top. So hold on, let me get that done. I'll be right back with you. Okay, we're getting close to the top here. And so I'm going to finish going up the bars here from side to side till I get to the top. Be careful not to split your yarn or your seaming thread, because that will tangle up your seam and it won't close nicely, and you'll have to pull it out and start over. So now we've come up to the top, and we're going to finish. We have no more bars left on either side, so we're going to finish the top off. And the way we do that is we go to the opposite side and go straight down underneath the bind off, and then come back to this side and go straight down beneath the bind off. And this makes your figure 8. Can you see the figure 8? Makes our little figure 8. And then we're going to pull. And it should close the gap. Slides up. You can feel it slide with your fingers. And once we weave this one end in for this tail, the top will be a smooth. Can you see how it's a nice smooth edge there? So look how lovely this seam is. You can pull it apart and see how it looks like a zipper. You've caught the bars and they just fit right into each other one by one, just like a zipper. And there's a little bit of a loose area there. Can you see that, where you can see the green thread? That means I just need to tighten it up a little more. Now that's gone. So we've got that nice zipper going all the way up and down. If you turn it over and look at the other side, your seam is 1 stitch thick on each side. These are the selvage stitches from each side, and you can look under here and you can see those are actually the bars from the other piece pulled through to this side. So you can see those, and you can look at this side and see the same thing on this side. You can see that it's all nice and even, and the tension is very, very nice. Now some people will tell you to slip the first stitch of each row, and I don't do that. You can see that when you don't, you knit all the stitches, or you work all the stitches. This is stockinette stitch fabric, so they're knit on the right side and purled on the wrong side, and then when you seam, you get this really nice invisible joint. So let's look at a little piece here where the edge stitches were slipped. For me, since I don't do that, the only time I really slip the edge stitches is for a specific purpose, like if you're going to be doing entrelac or sock heel flaps or something. But you can see, so there's only 1 bar for every other row across here. And so you have these big spaces in between the rows, and if you were to use these to seam, you're not going to get that lovely join. Also, what happens to me is when I slip that first stitch on the edge, then my next column in, can you see how all the stitches are uneven in size? Every other one's big and little. Same thing on this side. See how the first column in, the stitches, so that would be, when you're seaming, those would be the stitches that are right along here. Those big ugly stitches would be right there on the edge of your seam, and that wouldn't look very nice. So it's just personal preference, but my personal preference is not to slip the stitches, not to slip the first or last stitch when you plan to seam the edge, and to seam every row along. Don't skip rows. So that's that. I hope you enjoy my video. If you do, please share it with your friends. I'd love it if you would subscribe to my channel, and I look forward to seeing you again. Happy knitting.